General Lee. I think my favorite quote of his is, "Beauty is the blindest word in the English language." And if you study his life, he believed that quote. I don't know what you know about West Point Academy. I do not know how many soldiers have graduated from that place. But he is the only man to ever graduate without a single demerit. And I would be remiss to tell you that I am ashamed of my country that there are statues of Lee and Jackson at the War College in Carlisle, Barracks, Pennsylvania, that they won't take on. I was raised a Baptist, and when I read about Stonewall Jackson and his faith, how a man could walk into combat and say his life was in the hands of his God, and he had no fear of death. No fear. These two men are to me the top of American military figures, of Southern heroes. Their birthdays are both in January, shortly ahead. Remember them this month. They are two heroes. We will never see their like again. I would like to introduce our speaker, Terry Bailey from Mobile, Alabama. His mother is my dad's baby sister. He's my first cousin. I'd like to welcome Terry and his sister Jerry to our banquet tonight. We walked a lot of ground together, and as we have reached our maturity, let's just leave it at that.
Let's leave it alone.
And we have begun to walk the same trails again.
Yep, sure.
My son's Confederate veterans, he's been a brigade commander in South Alabama. Member Sims Camp, Mobile. I heard him do a program. Barb and I go to the car cruise. That's part of my childhood that I'm reliving, as my mother said. I can't leave hot rods alone. But he was at Beauvoir and did a program, and I was very taken by it, so I called him and asked him to come be our speaker tonight. I want to introduce Terry Bailey.
Thank you.
Everybody see
I'm going to move it around just a little bit because I'm going to be like Samuel Hankins tonight. When Samuel Hankins was riding that boxcar to Virginia, he rode on top of the boxcar because he wanted to see you be seen. So, I'm going to move this thing around here just a little bit. I appreciate Keith taking a little time to say something about Lee and Jackson, because now I won't have to and I'll tell another joke. Dr. Lee, I appreciate that music. Scotland the Brave puts chills on me, buddy. And we wouldn't have what we have in the South were it not for our Celtic heritage. And we appreciate that a whole lot. I am indeed honored to be here tonight. And quite frankly, I'm a bit humbled by it too, because anytime you get invited to come back to your hometown and share your love of the Confederate heritage with old friends, new friends, and your family, it is truly a blessing. So I appreciate that. I was thinking about it today. I have a debt of gratitude to the EC Walthall camp. I guess about 14 years ago, Keith got me interested in this. He helped me chase down my ancestors, and I went off down there to Mobile, got hooked up with the Sims camp, and I hadn't looked back. And it's been a real fun ride, and I wouldn't take anything for it. And two, this is the third time that I have been able to come up here and participate in this. The first time, we had Brother Hugh Hall up here. He did a fascinating program about John Brown. And I was in Pensacola back in October with the UDC chapter over there. And they tell me that Brother Hall is still living, which I'm sure he's got to be well into his 90s by now. But I look on Brother Hall as my inspiration. That program that he did there about John Brown was well researched, and it was truly the program that kind of lit a fire in me to study more and make myself get out and present the love of our heritage with people. And I think when we have people like that in our lives that are our inspiration, such as Lee and Jackson, we should count ourselves fortunate to have those kind of people. Like I say, being in the SCV and being Confederate's fun. And we might as well, I figured before we get down to business, we need to have a laugh or two. So, our camp in Mobile, we own a reproduction of a 24-pound Cohorn mortar, a cannon, if you will. Mobile's getting ready for Mardi Gras. And as a part of the Mardi Gras business, they have a mounted unit there in Mobile. And mounted units come from all over the South to work with Mobile during this thing. One of our camp members is a member of that mounted unit. And he called me the other day and he said, "Hey man," he said, "would you be willing to bring that mortar over to the Land Stadium and shoot it around them horses?" I said, "Yeah, buddy." and here's the good part of it too. Land Stadium is down in the heart of Obama land. So the idea that they ever go to Obama land and shoot a Confederate cannon with the idea of knocking a policeman off of a horse, I think this is going to be fun. Also, there's an interesting aspect to Mardi Gras in Mobile. Of course, when you say Mardi Gras, everybody thinks about New Orleans. But the Mobile Mardi Gras is the oldest Mardi Gras in the country. Now, back during Reconstruction, it was against the law, of course, for Confederate veterans and all to congregate together. Well, there was this one old Confederate veteran down there by the name of Joe Kane, and him and some of his buddies got good and tanked up one Saturday night during the Mardi Gras season. They got him a mule and a coal wagon. Joe Kane dressed up as an Indian, and they went off through the streets of Mobile thumbing their nose at the Reconstruction government. And as a result, the next year, our Mardi Gras was brought back into full swing. Now, if you want to know anything else about Joe Kane, I suggest you see my sister after the meeting, and she will tell you all about Joe Kane and his married widows. So I'll leave it alone there, sis. One of the other things I like to do is when I'm out and around, I like to go, when I go somewhere where I know one of my heroes has been or where my ancestors have been, I like to get me a rock or some dirt or something like that, you know. I got me a rock from the Great Sport Grenada Road out here, the old roadway, because I know that's, or reasonably sure that's where my ancestors came to Grenada in 1862 to join Walthall Company. I've got some dirt and rocks off the Lookout Mountain. I've got me some dirt out in one of the Alexander's Bridge in Chickamauga. A couple of years ago, the company I worked for sent me off to South Louisiana to work for a while, and so on the way back I went through Hahnville, Louisiana, and I found a place that was pretty close to where Richard Taylor had his plantation. Richard Taylor, of course, was commander of the Mississippi, Alabama, and East Louisiana Department, and he was also a brother-in-law of Jefferson Davis. So I found that place where his plantation was. I wheeled in there and I got me a couple of Ziploc bags of that dirt. When I come back through New Orleans, I went by Metairie Cemetery and I found went to Taylor's tomb, and I dumped the bag of that dirt out on General Taylor's grave, because I figured old General probably wants some of his dirt back since the Yankees took everything else. So I did that. I come out of Metairie Cemetery, I'm back on the highway and I'm headed home. Phone rings. This is the way the conversation went. It was my wife on the phone. "Hey, where you at?" "Well, I'm coming through New Orleans." "Well, I thought you'd be home now." "Well, I took a little side trip." "Oh, you been in a cemetery, ain't you?" "Yep, baby, you didn't know me." And I got to say, I love that woman to death for taking it far, because on those weekends that I decided to go off and play Confederate or militia, 1812 militia. As long as she's got plenty of cocos, the light bill has been paid for, the heat and air conditioning work, the TV, cable bill has been paid, she's good to go. Speaking of 1812, this weekend, not only are we in the sesquicentennial of the war, we're in the bicentennial of 1812. And this weekend they're commemorating the 200th anniversary of, or commemoration of the Battle of New Orleans. So there's lots of things going on that's really interesting. Me and the wife took off last summer, and we went up through North Georgia and into western North Carolina, a little trip up into the mountains. And our first stop was Kennesaw. Now, I didn't go to Kennesaw to go to the battlefield. I had something else in mind. I wanted to go to Pine Mountain. I wanted to find that marker where Bishop General Ananias Pope was killed. Because I wanted to go to a place and stand on that ground where I knew that Pope, Hardy, and Johnston had stood. So, wind my way around there, we find a place. The monument's actually on private property, but it's accessible to the public. And it's about a little, probably 200-foot well manicured trail in there in that monument. We walk up in there and we are visiting there and looking at it, and directly a little fellow walks up, and his name was Melvin. I know his name was Melvin because it had a hat on that said Melvin Pine Mountain Tours. So Melvin lived right across the road there, and he began to tell us about what was going on there. The Pine Mountain was a communication station. It's Snake Mountain, Pine Mountain, and Pinnacle Mountain. Well, on that terrible day in 1864, the Yankees saw Pope, Hardy, and Johnston up there, and they turned the cannon around there and made a couple of shots. Hardy and Johnston got the message, and they moved on, and for some unknown reason, Pope just stood there and stared for a moment or two, and it was either the second or third shot went right through, and he was probably dead before he hit the ground. He was killed so instantaneously that he had the same look on his face as he did that moment or two before his death. So here I am on this spot, and my tour guide, Melvin, he tells me that about a week or so before that happened, Patrick Claiborne was up there on that hill too, and they took a shot at Patrick Claiborne. And I'm thinking, boy, this heart's swelling up real good now. I'm here where Pope, Hardy, Johnston, and Claiborne's been. I can't hardly stand myself. Well, and Melvin busted my bubble. I'm supposed to tell y'all something, and if it leaves this room, I'm going to deny it to the day I die because I don't want my Confederate reputation ruined. About a week after the Battle of Kennesaw Mountain, guess who comes up on that mountain to stand in that same spot too? William P. Sherman. Now, I was just heartbroken over this deal. And usually when you go on vacation, I don't know about y'all, but my wife insists that I buy me a good pair of walking shoes. I usually go off over there to Walmart and get me one of the $23 wearing twice and throw them away, you know. Well, this time she had got me a pair of $80 shoes. It's the most comfortable shoes I ever put on my foot. Therefore, I couldn't throw them things away, but I would like to have. So I finally had to think about this thing a minute, and I look at it like a deck of cards. 4 aces beats a jack any day, right? There you have it. Now, I want to introduce y'all tonight to my newest hero. He was a fellow by the name of Samuel Hankins. I got introduced to Samuel Hankins at Beauvoir this past October when we did our Heritage Cemetery walk down there. We had about 6 or 7, they call us actors. We had about 7 actors down there, and we each portrayed somebody different that was buried in the cemetery. And I was fortunate enough to portray Samuel Hankins. There was a lady in that cemetery, and she was portraying a lady that was born, that was buried there. This woman had been married 7 times. Her last 3 husbands were Confederate veterans who were inmates of the Jefferson Davis Soldiers' Home. The newspaper reporter asked her, says, well, why do you keep marrying all them old Confederate veterans? She says, as long as a good law will take them, I will too. So anyway, well, that's how I got introduced to Samuel Hankins. Hankins is an interesting fellow. He was 16 years old. He joined the Confederate Army at Guntown. He went through some of the hardest fighting in the Eastern Theater. He was wounded and captured at Gettysburg. Spent 4 months in the Yankee prison. He comes home, partially recuperates, and then he gets on a horse and he rides off to war again. Folks, that's a hero in my book. I don't care how anybody else looks at it. That's a fellow, that man was dedicated to his country. He was dedicated to his cause, and that's all I can say about it. Now, the fun thing about getting into some of this research like this is you start stumbling across things that just you never thought about and things that just fascinate the daylight out of you. For instance, Hankins' brigade commander was killed at First Manassas, Bernard B. Subsequently, a fellow by the name of Joseph Davis became the brigade commander. Joseph Davis was born and raised in Woodville, Mississippi, and he was the nephew of Jefferson Davis. Joseph Davis was a college-trained attorney, lawyer. Before the war, he practiced law down here in Madison. After the war, he came back to Mississippi and took up the law practice in Gulfport. And Joseph Davis is buried at the Gulfport City Cemetery. The other fellow that I run into on this study of Hankins was probably, without a doubt, one of the most fascinating people in Mississippi history. A fellow by the name of John Marshall Stone. John Marshall Stone worked for the railroad before the war. He was commander of the 2nd Mississippi Infantry Regiment throughout the entire war. He had an opportunity to be promoted to a brigadier general. He refused that promotion just so he could remain with the 2nd Mississippi Infantry Regiment. After the war, he came back to Corinth, worked for the railroad for a while, then he got into politics, where he was elected as a state senator. Then in 1876, when the lieutenant governor had been impeached and removed from office, and Adelbert Ames resigned and left the state before being impeached, Stone, being president pro tem of the Senate, he became the governor of the state of Mississippi. He served out Adelbert's term and then he was elected 2 more times, making him the longest serving governor in the state of Mississippi. In 1878, during his first term as governor, John Marshall Stone made the arrangements to have Mississippi A&M College established for Mississippi State. Also, Stone County, Mississippi is named for John Marshall Stone. So, and I thought that was just really fascinating that Mississippi connection is there. And when we get to this point, we need to stop thinking about something here just a second. Now here, Hankins also writes in his book that he visited with Stephen D. Lee, and they discussed the way that the Confederate prisoners had been treated, or Confederate wounded had been treated at Vicksburg after the battle. And in a minute, you'll see a very interesting story that Hankins tells about his visit to Columbus. And so we can pretty much take it for granted that Hankins was well acquainted with John Marshall Stone. I feel like he was well acquainted with Joseph Davis because they both lived on the coast. So if you tie all that together, and given the fact that EC Walthall was so active in Mississippi politics after the war, it stands to reason more than likely Hankins was acquainted at the very least with EC Walthall. So, you know, when you look at it in that light, that certainly makes being able to stay here tonight and talk about Hankins here in the EC Walthall camp, it certainly makes it special. So, without any further ado, I'll let Samuel Hankins tell you the rest of the story tonight. To fulfill a promise of long standing, I give my experience as a private soldier boy in the War of the States from early 1861 until its close. I do not attempt to explain the causes of the war, as that theme engages the best historians. But I sincerely believe that no truer men ever espoused any cause. Suffice it to say that our leaders were well selected. The chief executive of our Confederacy, Jefferson Davis, stands the severest test. Our generals were brave and true. Our women were good and ever faithful, and they were never reconstructed. The cause of our failure was not in the lack of efficient leaders, but of resources. My personal experiences with such incidents as come under my observation in camp, on the march, and in prison are given to pay a tribute of merit to my comrades and people. That is the preface of my book, the only book that I, Samuel H. Hankins, would ever write. Simple Story of a Soldier describes the details of my life in the service. I wrote the book in 1905 while an inmate of the Jefferson Davis Soldiers Home in Biloxi, Mississippi. It was serialized in the Confederate Veteran magazine, and in 1912 it was published in a pamphlet. In the summer of 1861, I had just entered my 16th year, and like most boys at that age, I felt my own importance. In my hometown of Guntown, I was one of the first to enlist. I was eager for the fray. My father was bitterly opposed to secession, but he enlisted early and served to the end. Father was also opposed to my enlistment, but upon learning of my determination to enlist, he consented, and I'm glad that he did. A full company of 108 men were raised in Guntown and Itawamba County. We went to Corinth, where we joined several other companies, and our company became Company E, the Calhoun Rifles, 2nd Mississippi Infantry Regiment. Now at Guntown, we began our military training, which was a new experience for all of us, including our officers. Our captain was a splendid man, well versed in civilian matters, but rather ignorant of military matters. He was irritable by nature and rather vain. The captain would not come to the drill field until he had got himself a proper uniform. He had a coat of some unknown cut, with very large buttons on it, and rather long ankles. He had a pair of pants of the Zouave variety, and he had a hat that was about 2 foot tall, that had red feathers, white feathers, green feathers, and blue feathers in it. We looked at it and we wondered what tribe it had originally belonged to. The captain also had a sword and a copy of Scott's military tactics protruding from his pocket. On the first morning that we were assembled for drill field, our captain was going to teach us to be soldiers. He read aloud from his copy of Scott's military tactics, and then he proceeded to teach us how to march. When he gave the command forward march, about half of us stepped out on the wrong foot. After several attempts, we finally marched off in fair order. The captain was walking backwards and he was shouting, "Left foot, right foot, left foot." After marching several yards, he backed into a small stump and fell flat on his back. This brought laughter from all but the captain. When we got back to quarters that afternoon, the captain seriously considered resigning, but he was persuaded not to do so. If there was ever an extreme test of a man's patience, it is in drilling raw recruits. At Corinth, our regiment boarded a train for Harper's Ferry, Virginia. There were lots of kissing, it was sad, there were tears, there were many fond farewells. I didn't shed a tear. I expected this matter to be settled in a few days and we'd be back home soon. Every car was packed inside and out. I rode on top of the car. I wanted to see and be seen. And often we would stop at these towns and speeches would be delivered from the cars. Some of them were ludicrous and funny. One gentleman stood up and he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I have just left my home, my dear wife, and 9 small children, and a very lucrative business, that of a crossroads saloon, all of which I gave up to battle for my country. It was like tearing my heartstrings out to depart from my dear ones, and especially from my saloon. This wag had neither a wife, a child, nor a saloon." I was having a high time until Chattanooga. And as we approached Chattanooga, I noticed that the train was approaching a dark hole in the mountain. And I could plainly see that there was not near enough room for that train with me on top of that boxcar. I scurried like a lizard on a woodpile to find me a safe spot. The smoke, steam, the noise of that tunnel was a pure vision of Hades. I thought surely I would die in that tunnel before I ever had a chance to kill a Yankee. Upon our arrival in Harper's Ferry, our regiment was joined with the 11th Mississippi, 1st Tennessee, and 4th Alabama to form a brigade under the command of the gallant General Bernard E. We drilled by brigade, by company, by regiment, and squad using Hardy's tactics. Many of these movements were useless, as there is a vast difference between the drill field and the battlefield. It was also at Harper's Ferry where we were introduced to the vices of military life. A gambling epidemic broke out and morality was ignored for the time being. If a soldier endeavored to live right, he was ridiculed. However, shot and shell could bring repentance a lot quicker than a good old sister at any church. Battlefield repentance was the easy part. Keeping his repentance after the battle was the hard part. If his life was spared, the sacred resolve would soon be forgotten. And often on the march to battle, the road would be littered with all sorts of evidence of vice. And after the battle, there would be much prayer and Bible reading. The camp would get as quiet as the home of a Presbyterian minister on the Sabbath. The order would last a few days, and soon some fellow would slip around to the sutler's tent and purchase a new set of dice and playing cards. The argument was about the best way to analyze the character of a fellow. We had a mistaken idea of who would make the best soldiers. There were 2 fellows in our company from back home who were holy terrorists. Oddly enough, these 2 men were the only 2 cowards we had in our company. Now, many have inquired of me as how one felt upon entering battle. For myself, at first, it produced a feeling that I cannot explain. Although my second interest into a battle was one of dread. I've heard a few people say that after one becomes accustomed to battle, he will not dread. There's no truth in this. I believe experienced soldiers dread it more and more after each experience. It is true, however, that after one gets squarely engaged, and although friends and comrades are following thick and fast around him, the dread and fear are diminished, and he forgets the danger. Our first engagement was the Battle of First Manassas. The Yankees called it Bull Run. In the heat of the battle, General B yelled, "There stands Jackson like a stone wall, rally behind the Virginians." And an enemy ball shortly struck General B down. But it was General B who gave Jackson his famous nickname. Now, the war in 1861 was a picnic compared to the other 3 years of the war. We had good tents, plenty of rations and clothes, and there was little marching. There was also an excess of rice that first year. I ate so much rice that I have no appetite for it to this day. By 1862, we knew that the war had begun in earnest. I now began to wish that I had followed my father's advice, and had I done so, I would have been spared a bitter pill. In early 1862, we were stationed near Fredericksburg when we got orders to prepare to march. At this time, each soldier had a trunk or a valise, and we had company tent, we had knapsacks, we had cooking utensils, and we had blankets. When we were ordered to move, I put everything into my trunk except the necessities that I would have to have, and I marched off with the company. Shortly after we started marching, the clouds opened up and the rain fell down. About 3 miles into that march, I abandoned my rug, my blanket, and my knapsack. I knew that I had plenty of extra clothes and such in my trunk. Now, at this point, I must say that I have no idea of what become of that baggage wagon, nor my trunk. And here we are 50 years after that war, and I still wonder to this day what become of my trunk. We covered about 30 miles that day, and when the order came that night to stop, we just dropped in our tracks. We ate a little bit of hardtack, and then we spread our wet blankets on the ground for some much-needed sleep. Much to my horror, the next morning when I awakened, I found that I had slept in a sunken grave. Many a night as a child, I listened to ghost stories by one of our darkies we knew as Uncle Sam. The impression of those stories remain with me today. By the third day, our rations were spoiled and unfit to eat, and we made that march on an empty stomach. At nightfall, the outlook for rations was poor. However, after about an hour, the call came to draw rations. Now, we had a fellow that had the instinctive nature to have hung on to a skillet. He even made some straps so that he could carry the skillet rather easily. So at night when we would stop, we'd get that skillet out and we'd use it to cook our meals. This fellow slept with that skillet under his head. And I have to wonder how he did this, because I don't think the skillet ever cooled off. Many of us were sure that this skillet was in his wedding after the war. On about the 5th morning of this march, I woke with high fever and the measles. Several of us were placed into an open wagon and sent back to Richmond. It was raining, and I was uneasy that the measles was going to be my death. And after 2 days, we arrived at the hospital in Richmond, which was an old tobacco factory. It looked more like a morgue than a hospital. There were coffins stacked on both sides of the entrance. I had no idea as we walked into this place how we would ever be nursed back to health. I spent 10 days there, and I have no intention of returning to a hospital without being hog-tied. I got back to the brigade just in time for the Battle of Seven Pines. After Seven Pines, we went into camp near Richmond. Then a few days later, we were ordered to join Stonewall Jackson in the Shenandoah Valley. This engagement was called the 7 Days Battle. It was after the Battle of Gaines' Mill where I witnessed the best artillery shot of the war. Shortly after the battle, the enemy sent up an observation balloon. We were near the brigade artillery, and the artillery captain ordered a shot at that balloon. The shell exploded near the basket and out-tunneled the poor fellow. Now, about 3 years ago, I was in Columbus, Mississippi, and as I passed the hotel, I heard an old gray-haired gentleman remark that one of his men had been shot out of a balloon during the war. I stopped and asked him if this had happened at Gaines Farm, Virginia, and he said indeed it had. And I told him that I was near the gun that had made that shot. We had a long, pleasant conversation that afternoon on the porch of that hotel. After the Battle of Gaines' Mill, we remained in the line that night. It was the most miserable night I've ever spent in my life. My tongue was swollen from thirst, and for a night in June, it was terribly cold. Then to make it even worse, We heard the cries of the wounded all night long. At daybreak, we moved off in the direction that the enemy had taken, and we could hardly walk without stepping upon the dead. Malvern Hill was our next engagement, and it was the last battle of the 7 days. Now, I was detailed to outside picket duty. The instructions usually given to an outside picket is to fire at the enemy and then fall back. After about an hour of being on outside picket duty, I heard the cough of a horse, and I saw 2 riders approaching and working their way through the thicket, and they were coming my way. So I decided to hold my fire until I could see them better, and sure enough, I could tell they were dressed in gray. The riders came out right in front of me. It was General Jackson and his courier. I presented arms, and the general returned the salute and rode off. And I thought, what could he have been doing so near the enemy with only a single courier? After the 7 days battle, we went back to camp near Richmond for a few weeks, and then in September, we were ordered to join Marsh Robert for his expedition into Maryland. And on September the 17th, we engaged the enemy on the single bloodiest day of the war at Sharpsburg, Maryland. Our company was fortunate in this fight, as we only had 2 killed and 5 wounded. On our return to Richmond, we had to cross the Shenandoah River. Now, it was wide, but it was not so deep that it couldn't be forded. We had one chap that stopped and leaned his gun against the tree, and then he took his clothes off and his other stuff, and he rolled it all up into a tight ball, and he crossed the river, and when he got to the other side, he realized that he had left his rifle on the other side of the river. So he tossed his clothes into an ambulance, and he made a hasty retreat back across the river to recover his gun. But when he got back, the ambulance said he placed his clothes on to the left. The poor fellow struck out at double quick time in his skivvies in pursuit of his clothes. And as he ran by, we hooted and hollered and yelled at him, and you could hear that yelling for a mile or more. During October and November of 1863, we engaged with the Yanks from Suffolk, Virginia, to Goldsboro, North Carolina. It was during this time that there was an outbreak of smallpox. I do not know of anyone that survived after being infected. My messmate and bunkmate, Billy Shackfoot, died from smallpox. This caused me to be depressed and anxious as we had shared a blanket. It was also about this time that my feet were frostbitten, from which I still suffer to this day. We remained in North Carolina until the 1st of April, when our regiment was ordered to join General Longstreet at Suffolk. I spent most of April and May on picket duty. The warm spring weather had brought out the mosquitoes and gnats, and some nights they were completely unbearable. It was in May of 1863 that was the saddest event to occur in the war with the death of Stonewall Jackson. Up until that time, we did not entertain any thought of not having success. We had implicit faith in the leadership of General Jackson. There were many tears shed on that dark day. In June of 1863, we joined Hess Division, A.P. Hill's Corps, as General Lee began his move into the enemy's country. We had no idea that by the 1st of July, we would be in the biggest fight of the war at a place called Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Our first night in Maryland, we camped near Hagerstown. I was on provost duty that night, and we made a few arrests. Marsh Robert had issued very strict orders about molesting private property and committing depredations. All of us understood his orders, and as we passed through the towns, we often would find abandoned homes and farms, and none were molested. At Gettysburg, our division fought all 3 days. We fought in the railroad cut where the fight was hand to hand. It was here that a mini ball struck me in my left foot. On the first day of the battle, my company had 46 men. At the end of the 3rd day, there were only 2 of them fit for duty. Just before General Lee's rear guard left, a surgeon came by, and he removed the bullet and dressed my wound. I wanted to leave on an ambulance then, but I was too sick to get aboard, and besides that, I had 2 wounded friends there that was begging me to stay with them. Soon the Union Army arrived, and they began to tend to their dead and wounded, and they also cleared the field of guns and supplies. The dead horses were dragged up into a long row where they attempted to burn them. The only result was a terrible stench. We laid on that battlefield until July the 18th. Had it not been for the little bit of rain that we got, we would have died of thirst. It was then and there that I discovered in advance of General Sherman that war is hell. Late in the afternoon of the 18th, the Dutchman came along with a dump cart, and he ordered us to get on. He transported us to the railway station in town. That night, a train, cattle car arrived, train arrived with cattle, and the next morning they unloaded. Soon we were ordered to get aboard those unclean and filthy cattle cars. Our first stop was in York City, Pennsylvania. Here the citizens of the town approached the cars and begged us to take the oath of allegiance to the United States with the understanding that they would take care of us until the end of the war. Of the 250 men with me, not one accepted that proposition. While in York City, the doubt of our final success was strengthened. I saw many men of military age in civilian dress. Any of these in the Confederacy would have been in the service. With the overwhelming number of Federals in the field, all of their ports open, and with such surplus in the northern states, I wondered how we could ever hope to overcome such gigantic obstacles. We eventually arrived in Baltimore where we were marched through the streets on our way to the docks. Many tears of sympathy were shed for us as we marched through the streets. I overheard a well-dressed, aged lady remark that she had 5 sons in the Confederate Army and wished she had that many more. That lady was arrested for that remark. On board the vessel, I took a position on the deck. That night, the ship went through a thunderstorm, and it was tossed about like a cracker box. By dawn, we were a sick set. During our trip to David's Island, New York, 3 more men died of their wounds, and they received a sea burial. At David's Island, the Federals had built 22 pavilions, which ran nearly the entire length of the island. There was a mess room, a doctor's office, and a bathroom for each 2 pavilions. And since there were 2,500 Confederates on the island, tents had also been erected. Upon arrival, we divested all of our wearing apparel, which was burned, and each of us got a bath and a set of hospital clothes. Irish women cleaned the pavilions, they worked in the laundry, and they worked in the kitchens. Our diets changed daily, and it was good food. We had a library, and they even let us go fishing. But I hated being a prisoner. I detested the arrangement of flowers spelling words like Constitution, Union, and Abraham Lincoln. Sympathizers from New York came out every day and brought us things. There was a number of deaths caused by gangrene. And when as many as 250 to 300 men were able to travel, they were given a set of clothes and sent away to be paroled. I was in the last group because I had suffered from gangrene. Finally, my day arrived, and I was given a fine suit of clothes that included a fine frock coat. When I got to the gangway of the ship, a Yankee guard ordered me to take off my frock coat. He cut the buttons off, he rolled it into a knot, and then he took an axe and whacked off the tail. And when he handed it back to me, I threw it in the water. That was the only mean and unkind act that I ever endured as a prisoner at David's Island. As we sailed down the Bay of New York, we passed many gunboats. And as we passed each one, the captain would be hailed by the crew of the gunboats. And they asked about our destination, and the captain would say, "Fortress Monroe." Then they would ask, "What is your cargo?" To which the captain would reply, "Damn bobtail rebels." I wished I were David with a good slingshot, and I'd have taken his head to Mr. Davis. At Fortress Monroe, we were put aboard a steamship, and we were carried to City Point. It was here that I learned that Vicksburg and Port Hudson had fell on the same day that I was captured. At Petersburg, I was placed into a South Carolina hospital because Mississippi did not have one. There was a vast difference between this facility and what I had experienced at David's Island, but it was the best our poor country could offer. After a few days, I met with the medical board, and I was granted a 60-day furlough. Now, it took some time to get back to Oklahoma, as the railroads were badly damaged. Everything seemed so desolate, and that was especially the case near Oklahoma, as the enemy had recently passed through our section, and they had taken everything. My own family was without substance. I secured a horse and a darky to pilot me to the section of the country where I was told I could find my family. On the second day of this journey, I met one of our servants, and he told me where I could find my mother, which as it turned out, she was only about 2 miles away. In the center of a scrub pine field, there was a cabin which had become the refuge for my mother. Our meeting was a happy one, and had it not been for the faithful darkies, there would have been no meat and bread for this family. Before my 60-day furlough was out, the county medical board extended it another 60 days. And in the meantime, a cavalry company was organized, figuring that it would be better to be in the cavalry since I was unfit for infantry duty anymore. I was elected first lieutenant, and this was Company F, 3rd Battalion, Mississippi Cavalry. Now, we started out as an independent company, but we decided to attach ourselves to a regiment. This was a foolish mistake. We were soon dismounted and sent in as infantry at the Battle of Harrisburg, Mississippi. After this battle, we were ordered direct by rail to Atlanta, where on July the 28th of 1864, we engaged the enemy at Ezra Church. After the fall of Atlanta, we were sent back to Selma, Alabama, where our horses had been sent, and they were in bad condition. Now, at this time, I was detailed to take the unserviceable horses and some of the disabled men and locate a suitable recruitment camp. I gathered a few wagons and some tents, and we set off to find such a place. We moved off to the mountains of North Alabama, where we found a good spot not far from Rome, Georgia. It was in a valley with a running creek. We remained in this area until the onset of winter. And I don't understand why we stayed there so long. We were too weak to stop an army. There was nothing there to protect, as both armies had divested the country of everything, and occasionally we would venture out for a skirmish that usually got 1 or 2 men killed. As winter approached, we were ordered out of Alabama and back to Mississippi. We were constantly on the move. The enemy was everywhere, and we had little territory in which to operate. So in April of 1865, we were near Selma, Alabama. We were pitifully subsisting on anything obtainable. And when news arrived that General Lee surrendered, none of us were surprised. Thus ended the severest war in this country, or any other for that matter. Father against son, brother against brother. My own father, Major E.L. Hankins, served throughout the war as commander of Ashcraft's regiment. His only brother was a surgeon in an Illinois regiment. There were hundreds of similar cases. The Creator never made men equal to the Confederate soldier. For many months, none of us had the least hope of success. Yet we would stand up and be shot at for our country. Our poor government had exhausted all supplies of every kind and had not paid their soldiers for months. Notwithstanding, all rations were cut short, but complaints were seldom heard. The time is growing near when there will be none of us left to tell the story of the glory of the men who wore the gray. So I have made the foregoing contribution of my experiences in this simple story of a soldier. My beloved friends and patriots, I think you should take note of that last comment that Hankins made. Our heroes truly are long gone from this world. But I can tell you tonight that I know their spirit walks among us, and I know their blood runs through our veins. In 1905, when Hankins was writing this book, Stephen D. Lee was making a speech at the United Confederate Veterans Reunion in Louisville, Kentucky. This is what he had to say in his speech. It has not seemed the whole truth to me that the Confederate soldier went into battle to vindicate a constitutional argument. He went to war because he loved his people, because his country was invaded, because his heart was throbbing for his hearthstone. Here was the land which gave him birth. Here was his childhood's home. Here were the graves of his dead. Here was the church spire where he had learned it was not all of life to live, nor all of death to die. No hostile foot should ever tread this consecrated ground except over his dead body. And of course, we also know what else General Lee told us, General S.D. Lee told us. To you sons of Confederate veterans, we submit the vindication of the cause for which we fought. To your strength will be given the defense of the Confederate soldier's good name, the guardianship of his history, the emulation of his virtues, the perpetuation of those principles he loved and which made him glorious and which you also cherish. Remember, it is your duty to see the true South. The true history of the South is presented to future generations. Until we meet again, let us remember our obligations to our forefathers, who gave us the undeniable birthright of our Southern heritage and the vision, desire, and courage to see it perpetuated. My dear friends, all I can say is God bless the EC Walthall camp, God bless the South, and long live Dixie. Thanks so much.